June 24, 1944. Southwest of Nagasaki, Kyushu, 32 to 24 N, 40 to 38 E. The sea was a black, sheeted quiet. The horizon a smudge where moonlight met oil-slick water. On the surface deck of USS Tang, a Valor-class submarine riding low in the water, the night tasted of salt and battery acid. The diesel engines idled like sleeping beasts, muffled beneath canvas in the careful hush of men pinned to their stations. Lookouts hunched under windbreaks, breath ghosting in the chill, eyes straining for mastheads and phosphorescent wakes. Somewhere aft, the sonar operator clicked his pencil, fingers stained with carbon paper, listening to the submarine's own heartbeat through a web of circuits and valves. Lieutenant Commander Richard H. O'Kane stood on the conning tower wrapped in a heavy coat, the collar pulled to his jaw. His hands, unsteady, calloused, and rested on the iron rail. The night goggles hung idle at his throat. Tang's commanding officer had already briefed the bridge. Night surface attack, break the convoy, get in close, and use the submarine's speed and surprise. His voice in the dark was low, measured. Every man on Tang knew what a measured voice meant. Action, imminence, the hard choreography of torpedo fire and evasive turns rehearsed in gray light that morning. Naval History and Heritage Command +1. The radar had been intermittent, eaten by squalls. Rain held off, but the cloud bank pressed low, turning mast and smoke into silhouettes. The crew moved with a kind of tight-lipped efficiency. Petty officers checking gyros, torpedomen unclipping safety pins, the quartermaster whispering bearings. Above them, stars hid like witnesses. Far ahead, the faint, ghostly plumes of other ships' wakes began to show. A hint of movement, a scatter of lights that might be masked lanterns. The contact report on the plotting table was simple and brutal. 3 tankers, a transport, a freighter, and an escort screen. A small fleet, but for a submarine in the right place at the right time, it was an opportunity to rip a hole in Japan's logistics. U-boat.net +1 Tang's stern slipped through a patch of mirror-calm water, and for a slotted instant the submarine felt like a blade sliding into a loaf. O'Kane's plan was the old, dangerous American night surface gambit. Drive through the convoy, fire short, accurate spreads, then run for open water before the escorts could close and turn their depth charges into snarls of metal and water. The torpedo tubes were reloaded and primed. The Mark 14 and, by this time on some boats, the electric Mark 18s were in the racks. Torpedomen, faces shadowed by caps and smoke-stiffened collars, bore the weight of each cylinder like ritual. The click of the tube doors and the whispered commands were part of the submarine's heartbeat. I biblio at the bow, a lookout signaled faint silhouette 3 points abreast closing. The navigator took a bearing and fed it to the helm in a thin voice. 2 points off the starboard bow, closing at 8 knots. The engineering watch eased the diesels to match the plan. Speed was currency. The sea smelled now not only of salt but of coal smoke and the faint metallic tang of old oil. Somewhere inside Tang, a box of letters lay unopened in a bunk. Folded hands, a child's drawing. A ticket to a post-war life none of them were promised. The men ignored these things outwardly. Inwardly, they made the calculations people always make when danger is real, but the night is immediate. Which of my things will I sear into memory if the world ends in a geyser of fire? From the conning tower, O'Kane watched the convoy's pattern. Merchant hulls riding high, tankers low and sluggish, their decks smeared with the pale shapes of life-saving gear. The escorts were closer than he liked. 2 destroyer-type vessels and smaller sub-chasers, their silhouettes punctuated by searchlight housings and gun stanchions. O'Kane's face was a mask. In his chest, strategy and instinct tangled. He thought only of angles, lead, and the least possible exposure to depth charges. Break them, he told his officers. Get inside their screen. Close to point blank. Fire fast, run. The words were businesslike and immediate, the kind that leave no room for rumination. The bibliotang slipped between the convoy columns like a ghost threading between lampposts. Water licked the hull. The metal sang under strain. On the bridge, the chief of the boat slapped O'Kane's shoulder, a brief, almost absurdly human gesture, and returned to his station. The first target came into range, a tanker with a long, dark flank and a bow that cut the waves like a dull knife. O'Kane signaled the torpedo control officer. The men moved as if pulled by a single will. Gyro settings called out, torpedo doors cycled, depth settings confirmed. For a breath that was as long as a minute and shorter than a heartbeat, All sound on Tang focused into the soft, mechanical music of machines doing their work. U-boat net, then. As if someone had turned on a light in a theater, Tang's night moved from waiting to violence. Torpedo crews shouted the last numbers, hands released, and the first torpedoes slipped into the black and away. From the conning tower, the flash of muzzle light was invisible. Torpedoes were launched silently like thoughts. But the men knew, felt, and waited for the result. They would not have to wait long. The convoy's calm fractured. A fireball flared against the low cloud bank, heat licking up into the sky, and the sea answered with an eruption of timber and metal. The attack that followed would be counted in minutes. The consequence would be counted in ships lost and in the stunned radio rooms of Tokyo Command. The explosion that tore through the first tanker rolled across the night like thunder dragged underwater. A flash of orange ripped open the darkness, and the shockwave struck Tang's bridge seconds later. A hard slap of air and heat. On the deck, a lookout ducked instinctively, his helmet clattering against the rail. A fountain of burning fuel rose from the sea. Black smoke lit from within, twisted skyward like a living thing. Inside the submarine, the control room was a study in tense silence. The men listened for the telltale whomp, the dull, wet impact of a torpedo's contact pistol detonating against steel. 1, 2, then a third, each followed by the violent groan of a ship's hull giving way. In the after-torpedo room, sweat streaked down the backs of men stripped to undershirts, their hands trembling not from fear, but from the precise violence of success. Direct hit on the lead tanker, came the report through the voice pipe. Secondary fires spreading. Commander Richard O'Kane didn't allow himself a smile, only a short nod. Good, reload forward. Prepare to fire on the next one. His voice was steady, deliberate, a captain holding the rhythm of battle. Ahead, the Japanese convoy had broken into confusion. Merchantmen swung wildly off course, trying to scatter. The escorts, 2 destroyers, began to fan outward, their searchlights cutting through the night in harsh white arcs. The light found the first burning ship and revealed a scene of chaos. Men scrambling on tilting decks, the tanker's stern already disappearing beneath oily flame. From Tang's periscope, O'Kane watched figures leap into fire-lit water. He shut one eye, then lowered the scope and turned back to his crew. Target 2, transport 1400 yards. Let's make it count. The plotting table glowed faintly with red light. Bearings were called out like psalms. Range 1350. Track 45 true. Speed 6 knots. The fire control party adjusted the dials on the TDC, the torpedo data computer, the analog brain of the submarine. Numbers spun, gears clicked, and a red needle settled on its mark. Open outer doors 1 through 4, O'Kane ordered. A hiss answered. At exactly 1:48 hours, 4 more torpedoes launched from Tang's bow, invisible but unstoppable. They sliced through the sea at nearly 50 knots, bubbles streaming in twin white scars behind them. 2 minutes later, the second ship of the convoy, a passenger transport carrying hundreds of troops, vanished into a shattering bloom of flame. The blast rocked Tang's hull even at distance. Gauges trembled, light bulbs flickered. Another one's going down. The sonar operator called out, headphones pressed tight. Breaking up, you can hear it. She's breaking. And indeed, through the water came the horrible tearing moan of a dying ship's structure giving way. A sound that seemed to travel through bone as much as through sea. Men inside Tang fell silent. They all knew that below that churning patch of fire and steel were sailors and soldiers. Enemies, yes, but men all the same, dragged down by the cold weight of war. The silence didn't last long. Escort bearing 085. Closing fast, Tang dove. The diesel engines cut. The boat transitioned to electric power, and the hum of motors replaced the steady growl of combustion. Take her down to 150 feet, O'Kane commanded. Rig for silent running. The crew moved in rehearsed unison. Hatches sealed, fans stopped, loose tools tied down. In the sudden hush, the only sound was the sea rushing past the hull and the soft creak of metal settling under pressure. Depth charges followed, a dozen explosions cascading above them, each one hammering the submarine like an angry god. The lights flickered. Men gripped pipes and bulkheads, teeth clenched, waiting for the next blast. One detonated close enough to knock dust from the ceiling. Another jarred a light fixture loose, sending glass skittering across the deck, but Tang held. She had survived worse, and O'Kane trusted her hull as much as his own hands. When the echoes faded, Tang rose cautiously to periscope depth. Through the thin lens, O'Kane saw the aftermath of his attack. 2 ships sinking, one burning so brightly that its reflection lit the undersides of clouds. The convoy was in ruins. What had begun as a coordinated formation was now a scatter of frightened vessels fleeing in every direction. The Japanese escorts hunted phantoms, chasing sonar echoes, depth-charging their own confusion. Tang's navigator marked the sinking positions on the chart, small black X in the Sea of Japan, and looked up. 2 confirmed. 3rd burning. O'Kane nodded. His jaw tightened. We're not finished yet. Turn us around. Load aft tubes. Tang would strike again before dawn. And the legend of the submarine that shattered an entire convoy in one night was about to be written into Japanese naval nightmares. The water around USS Tang was now a living storm. Above them, the Japanese escorts had shaken off confusion and closed in with furious precision. Hydrophones hissed and moaned with the noise of propellers, searchlights sweeping like knives across the oil-slicked surface. Each minute of silence below was bought with held breath and clenched jaws. Inside the submarine, the red lights cast faces in ghostly relief. Condensation dripped from the overhead like sweat. The air was thick with diesel fumes, battery acid, and human tension. The control room hummed with suppressed energy. The whisper of valves, the tick of the clock, the faint buzz of electricity in the copper cables. Bearing 270, closing fast. The sonar operator hissed. 2 contacts, probably the destroyers. O'Kane crouched beside the chart table, one hand gripping the edge. All stop, he whispered. Let them pass over us. The order rippled quietly down the compartments. Motors ceased. The submarine drifted, suspended in a dense black void 180 feet below the surface. Then came the sound every submariner dreaded. The ping. A sharp metallic ping echoing through steel, clean and methodical. Another followed closer, each pulse hammering their nerves like a metronome of doom. They've got our range, murmured the executive officer. Hold steady, O'Kane replied. Nobody moves. A long second stretched into eternity, and then the destroyer above unleashed her fury. The first string of depth charges detonated aft, tearing the sea apart. The pressure slammed Tang's hull, knocking men from their posts. Lights flickered. A gauge burst, and somewhere aft a man shouted that the after torpedo room had taken on water. Damage control, came the order. In the compartment, 2 sailors worked by flashlight, stuffing rags and wrenches into a small leak that hissed seawater across the deck. Sweat rolled down their faces, their hands slipping on wet metal, but they held it. The chief gave a short grunt. Leaks contained. Pumps holding steady. Above, another pattern of charges fell, and closer this time. The shock lifted Tang's stern and dropped it again like a toy. Men slammed into bulkheads. Someone cursed as a pipe snapped loose. Dust and oil mixed into a choking fog. O'Kane steadied himself on the periscope column, knuckles white. They're guessing now, he muttered almost to himself. We're deeper than they think, he was right. The destroyers, hunting by instinct and imperfect sonar, had lost track of their target. The Japanese were frantic now. They dropped charges by the dozen, sweeping the area in broad, wasteful arcs. The sea above boiled with explosions, but Tang slid silently below, slipping through their net like smoke through fingers. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The attack slackened. The sonar returned only distant propellers and the echo of wreckage settling on the seabed. Tang's men sat in near darkness, their nerves drawn tight as piano wire. Some prayed softly. Others stared at nothing, waiting for the captain's word. Finally, O'Kane gave it. All ahead 1/3. Bring her up to periscope depth. Slowly, Tang ascended. The world outside lightened from black to dark green. O'Kane raised the scope and rotated it in silence. The sea was empty except for fire and debris. Burning oil stretched for miles, a floating inferno broken by the shapes of lifeboats and shattered hulls. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint cries of men clinging to wreckage. One of Tang's officers exhaled. God almighty! What a sight, O'Kane said nothing. His eyes were hard. We'll make our report later. Right now we finish the job. He ordered the submarine to flank speed on batteries, a daring move. Tang broke westward, racing to cut off the convoy's surviving ships. Through the periscope, O'Kane spotted 2 stragglers, a freighter limping with a list to port and a tanker still intact. guarded by a single escort vessel zigzagging desperately. This was the kill zone he'd been waiting for. "Plot intercept," O'Kane said. "Come left to course 165. Load tubes aft, depth 3 feet. We'll hit them from behind." Tang swung gracefully through the dark water, the hum of her motors blending with the murmur of the wounded sea. Every man aboard knew what was about to happen. The second strike more dangerous than the first. If they were detected now, the escorts would drop everything they had left. But stealth and precision were Tang's trade. As the periscope broke the surface again, the two targets were clear, one burning, one running. O'Kane smiled faintly, not with joy but with the satisfaction of a craftsman finishing a masterpiece of destruction. "Range 900 yards, said the TDC operator. "Fire 1. A streak of compressed air hissed through the aft tubes. "Fire 2! Seconds later, the sea behind Tang erupted. The freighter's stern lifted out of the water, then split open like paper, its engine room blooming in a burst of red flame. The escort ship wheeled frantically toward the explosion and into the path of Tang's final torpedo. The hit was perfect. By first light, the Sea of Japan was a graveyard. The dawn came up slow and crimson over the oily waters, painting the wreckage in an eerie glow that shimmered like blood. Lifeboats drifted among patches of burning fuel. Bits of wood, twisted metal, and cargo, crates of rice, drums of aviation fuel, even floating sandals moved with the tide. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries lost in the soft hiss of waves lapping against ruin. In the midst of it, a Japanese destroyer, the last surviving escort, crept through the debris field, her engines throttled down. The ship's commander, Lieutenant Commander Sato Kenji, stood on the bridge in disbelief. Smoke and ash clung to his uniform. His binoculars trembled slightly in his hands as he scanned the horizon. Everywhere he looked, ships were gone, vanished. 5 hours earlier, his convoy had been a proud formation steaming toward Formosa. 2 tankers, 3 freighters, a troop transport, and his escorts. Now only his ship remained. The others, men he'd dined with, laughed with, were ash and oil, sir, his navigator said quietly, voice raw from smoke. No survivors spotted from the Kokushomaru. The sea's on fire where she went down. Sato didn't answer immediately. His eyes swept over the glistening expanse, then dropped to the chart spread across the plotting table. The pencil marks there, the convoy routes, the last recorded positions, were meaningless now. Somewhere beneath this same water, invisible and untouchable, an American submarine had done what entire air squadrons had failed to do. "Signal base at Sasebo," Sato said finally, his voice low. "Report convoy destroyed by enemy submarine. 1, possibly 2 boats." Extremely accurate. Attacks from surface and submerged. The radio man hesitated. "Sir, the fleet command will ask, how many?" Sato lowered his binoculars. His eyes were hollow. "Tell them 1 submarine." When the message reached shore hours later, it caused shockwaves through Japan's naval command. The tone was terse, the content unbelievable. Entire convoy lost. Single enemy submarine responsible. In Tokyo, inside the underground communications center of the Imperial Navy, staff officers gathered around the decoded message in silence. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, and somewhere down the corridor, the faint rumble of distant bombers could be felt through the concrete. Captain Matsuo, of the Submarine Defense Bureau, read the report twice before speaking. "This must be exaggeration," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "A single submarine cannot destroy 6 ships in one night." Another officer replied grimly, "We've been hearing similar reports. Last month, 3 convoys were struck near the Luzon Strait. The Americans are using new tactics, surface attacks at night, radar-guided." "Radar," Matsuo muttered. "So they see us even when we cannot see them." He turned the page. The report mentioned no survivors except those plucked from the sea by Sato's crippled destroyer. The name Tang appeared in intercepted Allied communiques, one of the new Balau-class boats, commanded by an officer with a record of uncanny success. Richard Hetherington O'Kane. The name had become infamous among Japanese sailors. They whispered it in the way soldiers whisper about ghosts. Meanwhile, aboard Tang, O'Kane's crew was bringing the submarine home through still dangerous waters. They ran submerged through most of the morning, surfacing only to recharge batteries and report success to Pearl Harbor. The coded transmission went out in short bursts. 5 enemy ships sunk. Estimated tonnage 10,000 plus. No damage to own ship. En route base. The crew allowed themselves a brief celebration, coffee, a quiet laugh, a handshake between shipmates who had just survived what should have killed them. In the cramped wardroom, the smell of strong coffee mixed with sweat and machinery grease, O'Kane joined them, his uniform damp, his face lined with exhaustion. "We did our duty," he said simply. "You men performed like the best crew on this ocean. Don't ever forget that." There were no cheers, no toasts, just quiet pride. Above on the conning tower, the Pacific stretched empty and vast, indifferent to what had just happened. But somewhere in the burning distance, Japanese sailors clinging to wreckage stared across that same horizon and wondered if the sea itself had turned against them. For many in the Imperial Navy, this was the night the ocean stopped feeling like home. The hunter's ocean had become the hunted's tomb. In Tokyo, the Naval Staff Office began redrawing shipping routes, diverting convoys farther from danger, though nowhere, it seemed, was safe from the American sharks. They did not yet know that this same submarine, USS Tang, would go on to carve its name into history again, and meet a fate as strange as it was tragic. But for now, in June 1944, the legend was born, the submarine that sank an entire convoy and vanished into the dawn without a trace. The weeks after the Kyushu convoy attack cemented USS Tang's reputation as the deadliest predator in the Pacific. By mid-July 1944, her name was whispered in wardrooms and radio rooms from Truk to Tokyo Bay. Merchant skippers altered course at the first hint of sonar echoes. Escorts dropped their charges at shadows. Even American submariners, men hardened by their own hunts, spoke of Tang with reverent unease. Every successful submarine had its rhythm. The precise coordination between captain, helmsman, fire control, and torpedo gang that made the difference between legend and loss. Tang's crew had achieved something more, a sixth sense, a near-silent communication that allowed O'Kane to fight at impossible ranges, in impossible odds. Their targets were the lifelines of the Japanese Empire, freighters loaded with steel, oil tankers bound for the home islands, troop transports carrying reinforcements to doomed island garrisons. Each time O'Kane sighted a convoy, his plan was the same: strike fast, strike close, and vanish. In July, Tang stalked another convoy near the Luzon Strait under a swollen moon. The air was thick with the tropical weight of typhoon season. Lightning flashed in the distance like distant artillery. Inside the submarine, the men were stripped to their waists, skin slick with sweat, waiting for orders. "Contact bearing 085, the sonar operator whispered. "Multiple screws. Estimate 4 or 5 ships." O'Kane leaned over the chart. "We'll get ahead of them. Night surface attack again. They won't expect us twice." The sea boiled with rain and phosphorescence as Tang broke the surface. Spray lashed over the deck. The men at the bridge clung to rails as lightning revealed the shapes of ships, shadows against flashes of white. In moments of illumination, they could see the fat bellies of freighters, their wakes glowing faintly like wounded stars. O'Kane's orders came quick and clear. "Set depth 6 feet. Fire on my mark." 3 torpedoes streaked from the bow, invisible against the storm. Seconds later, boom, boom, boom. A triple detonation rolled across the sea. Flames leapt high as a freighter carrying aviation fuel split clean in half. The flash illuminated Tang herself, a black silhouette against a burning world. Hard right rudder. Tave dive dive. The submarine plunged beneath the surface, pursued by the furious charge of destroyers. Depth charges cascaded through the sea, white-hot suns of noise and pressure. The crew braced, lips bloodless, as the hull groaned under the hammering shockwaves. But the sea again belonged to Tang. The escorts found nothing. When the echoes died, Tang returned to finish what she'd begun. In the following hours, she sank another transport and damaged a third before disappearing into the night squall. Her logbook recorded the events with chilling brevity. 2 ships destroyed, moderate resistance, no casualties, weather favorable, each line written in calm, clinical hand, but between them was terror, brilliance, and luck enough to fill a dozen lives. By August, Tang's victories were celebrated across the U.S. Pacific Fleet. She had sunk more ships in fewer patrols than any other submarine afloat. The press at home began to romanticize her exploits. The Phantom Submarine of the Pacific, they called her. Crewmen from other boats spoke her name with awe. O'Kane, once a quiet lieutenant who had served under the great Dudley Mush Morton aboard Wahoo, was now the Navy's most feared wolf. But for the Japanese, Tang was a curse, a single predator rewriting the balance of their war at sea. The Imperial Navy's convoy losses had reached crisis levels. Ships no longer moved without heavy escort. Oil shortages crippled operations. Each time Tokyo received another loss report stamped "Sunk by Submarine," officers asked the same question: was it Tang? In September, as Tang prepared for what would be her final patrol, O'Kane wrote a brief note to his wife Ernestine. "We've had our luck, and we'll keep using it until the ocean runs out of room for us. If you hear silence from us, know that it was an honorable one." He sealed it, handed it to a courier at Pearl Harbor, and boarded his ship for the last time. The crew of Tang, men who had survived the impossible, joked, played cards and read letters on the pier as the sun set behind Oahu. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. They were pushing their luck to its edge. O'Kane's final briefing was simple: patrol the Formosa Strait, intercept Japanese evacuation and supply convoys, and strike at any target of opportunity. No one could know that in the coming weeks, the hunter would meet the cruelest irony of all, that Tang's deadliest weapon would turn against her. October 24th, 1944. The Formosa Strait. The night was moonless, windless, eerily calm, the kind of quiet that only the Pacific could summon before it took men's lives. USS Tang cut through the black water like a whisper, her deck awash in the dim glow of instrument lights. She was on her fifth and final war patrol, and already a legend. Commander Richard H. O'Kane stood on the bridge, coat collar high against the damp, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "Convoy ahead," the lookout whispered. 5 ships bearing 075. 2 escorts closing. O'Kane lowered the glasses and smiled faintly. "That'll do. This convoy was one of the last supply groups fleeing from the Philippines to Formosa, a desperate movement of men and materiel trying to outrun the tightening grip of the U.S. Navy. For the Japanese sailors aboard those ships, it was a last thread of hope. For O'Kane and Tang, it was another hunt. At Oro 1:30 hours, Tang crept into position, running surfaced under cover of night. The radar painted the picture clearly, targets scattered in loose formation, one straggler lagging far astern. O'Kane decided to strike at point-blank range, the tactic that had become his signature: bold, fast, and merciless. Inside the control room, the crew moved like clockwork. Tubes 1 through 6 loaded. Fire control tracking. The TDC hummed as the men fed in bearings, range, and speed. Sweat glistened on forearms. Tools clinked softly, and the soft drone of the electric motors filled the confined space. O'Kane's voice came over the intercom, calm as always. "We'll start with the transport. Fire 2 torpedoes. Make 'em count." The first torpedo left the tube at 01:39, a clean launch, no telltale wake. The second followed moments later. 30 seconds passed. Then came the flash. A deep orange blossom rose over the sea, spreading fire across the water. A moment later, the shockwave reached them, a dull concussion that rattled bolts and ribs. The first target, a troop ship loaded with soldiers, was gone. O'Kane didn't hesitate. Next target, freighter 2,000 yards. Fire 3, the sea erupted again. 2 direct hits. The freighter's back broke cleanly in the middle. She folded into herself like a paper toy. Within 20 minutes, 3 enemy ships were gone, 2 crippled. Tang's score for the night, and her war, was now unmatched by any submarine in history. Then came the final act. At Aero 210, O'Kane spotted the last straggler, a large transport dead in the water but not yet sunk. He ordered a single torpedo from Tube 10 aft. The men in the torpedo room worked quickly. They knew the routine, but the silence in the compartment was heavy. They'd all felt that strange, wordless tension before something went wrong, the kind that made even veterans glance at each other without speaking. "Tube 10 ready," came the report. "Fire," O'Kane said. A moment later, the aft torpedo slid into the black, its compressed air wake glowing faintly white under the stars. The crew waited for the explosion. 30 seconds passed, then 40, then 50. Nothing. Torpedo missed, the TDC officer said. O'Kane frowned. It should have hit by now. Then, from the sonar room, Captain, we're picking up a fast return. It's coming back! For an instant, no one spoke. Then O'Kane's face hardened. Full ahead! Hard left rudder! The order came too late. The wayward torpedo, one of the new electric Mark 18s, had circled back in a deadly loop, its guidance system malfunctioning. The weapon Tang had trusted, the same kind that had brought them so many victories, was coming home. Seconds later, the ocean split open behind them. A brilliant orange-white flash tore through the stern. The explosion ripped the submarine like a beast biting into its own tail. The aft compartments were obliterated instantly. Men on the bridge were thrown into the air. Inside, lights died, gauges shattered, and steel screamed as Tang began to sink. Seal the after compartments, someone shouted. Flooding fast. But the water came too quickly. In less than 30 seconds, the stern was gone, swallowed by black water. O'Kane was thrown clear of the conning tower by the blast, tumbling into the sea as Tang slid beneath the surface. Around him, the night was chaos, oil fire, wreckage, and men fighting to stay afloat in the slick, burning water. He could see the faint glow where Tang had gone under, could hear the muffled groan of her hull imploding as she descended. Only 9 men, including O'Kane, would survive the sinking. They clung to life rafts and wreckage as dawn broke over a sea now silent and pitiless. Hours later, a Japanese destroyer, one of the same escorts they had hunted, picked them up. O'Kane and his men were taken prisoner, their legendary submarine now resting on the seafloor. When the war ended, Richard O'Kane came home to a hero's welcome and the Medal of Honor, awarded for a record that still stands. 24 enemy ships sunk in 5 patrols, 116,000 tons of shipping destroyed. Yet the memory of that final explosion, of his own torpedo turning on Tang, never left him. In interviews years later, he would say little about it. Only once did he comment softly, "She was the best ship I ever had, and she died doing what she was built to do." Today,